Welcome to TradeTheNBA.com. This is John. This report is for the 3rd of October. Where to begin? I mean, when you have these kinds of days, it's you just want to get straight to the actual trading part of it. But I mean, you can see that we've had this decay that's been building with the DOC spread that actually began from the really big move back here. We've never had a steel reset until we got one right about here. And we thought, okay, maybe that's going to smooth things over, and then we sort of traded across for a little bit. But once it moved back above and below again, right here where we then had the green below red, that was the beginning of the end of it. And it took a long time for it to actually develop. We knew that it was going to be closer to when the Azure here got close to the gold. And in fact, it was. We still had plenty of little dips below in between there. And then once those actually met, which is what we look for, boom, it just cascaded lower. We're still below the red line. So even a pop up here, depends on where we end, we're still likely to see that retraced as well. If it stays that way, I mean, it's the start of the day, it's early. Broke below the 61, 50%, made it all the way down to the 38. Held up a little bit on that, and then pretty much, wipes out everything from September, all in the first 2 days. But this is what we've always talked about. Markets do fall, 66% faster, at least that much faster than they rise. And so you can just wipe out all that movement pretty darn quick. When people flood to the exits, there's just no room to get out, and liquidity dries up, making it worse. NASDAQ, likewise, same. Actually, it's a little bit better. I mean, you can see there's been some improvement from a DOC reading, as well as from the extreme histograms are below. So that may be the catalyst that keeps things from continuing to devolve. The euro bouncing back off that, more talk about the potential of Brexit exit situation deal, the EU caving a little bit. Plus, they had to jump in. This was starting to get pretty ugly and getting into a scary position because, again, it's like we've talked about. Once you start breaking that 104 range for the euro, anything could happen at that point. And then what do? Because the floodgates open up. So, will the central bank kind of pull that baby back in place? But it's still no reset at steel. The fact that it's above here is a little bit bullish at this particular point, but as soon as that steel comes back down, it'll fade again. Oil, this is an indication that there's more problems out there as far as a supply issue, even though there was a crude draw and stuff. The reality is that they're looking at and this is something I talked about. As soon as that whole impeachment talk and everything, people hunkered down, and I think you're going to see that develop in hiring and all sorts of things. And I think we started to see the first signs of that. And this is what happens, and it's earlier because usually going into an election, you already get a slowdown where people tend to freeze if there's uncertainty, and I think this is added to it. So. It's deflationary in a broader sense, but there's also greater fear. So that's actually enough to get gold a little bit of a spark. Not a huge one at this particular point. It's a little too early. So just straight to the 5K because it was just a wonderful day. We had some great examples of what we look for when we get into this, what I call the grand short, where you have initially the DOC spread, and then that steel crosses above the cyan there. And then it's just a matter of following that as long as it doesn't do a reset. And when you do get either P2 setups or nice conversion moments, the problem is with it is that as soon as you get the steel coming back down, so as soon as this puts in a P2 with the X, in this particular case, it's very problematic because you have steel crossing below cyan, bearish. You also have green below the red, and red already starting to flat turn over, and you don't have an orange dip of any kind. That's a perfect opportunity to add into a sell. Happened to be right at a previous algo 29-23 range, and then that led to a cascade. Similar situation happens here as you get the improvement of the red DOC. It's below the previous pivot that's up over here, and you get a rejection of green and cyan again. Boom, another opportunity for it. These are a little bit tougher when you're at the zero line because you'll get a break and then it usually tries to come back up to it. That it happened again exactly at the 29.05. Well, there you have it, another perfect opportunity because as soon as it starts to break down, you can look for positive moves where you have steel rising as opportunities whenever it comes back up to that 05 to be able to hit it again. In this case, we actually saw a nice buildup of the DOC red at this particular point, crossed past the previous high pivot. So at that point, I'm thinking, okay, well, that's the opportunity to cover at the lows here because you're likely to see a little bit of a pop. Sure enough, we get the pop, but then it rejects right here the first time, but you didn't quite have steel coming below cyan, so that's usually going to give you a little bit more draw across. But as soon as it crosses below and you have the exact same situation, this time with the green moving below red, leads to the next series, and that's cross all the way over here. We'll just get, because this is a long day, and from that point, when that breaks across, all brand new lows coming through there, and again, no reset at all going through. You get another build right here. We had the pivot. This one broke past it right about there. Didn't do a whole lot of anything, but then you end up with that very strong crossover. Even if you wait till the next bar to get the guaranteed confirmation that the steel's going to cross here, I'm looking at it thinking, okay, yeah, it's more likely than not going to do it. I already have shakeout falling. But even if you wait to the next bar, it still held on for a little bit before breaking down to new lows at that particular point. Same situation right here. Rejection of the cyan green. Again, you want to wait for another. It holds up. It's just a matter of being patient enough to say, okay, yeah, I'm willing to wait for it to come back up to take that after the cross, or for me, when you're talking more position, you have to add in a little bit slower so that you're not, creating any major ripple. But that led to a whole nother breakdown. Then we moved below. Well, in this case, we had another algo much lower, and this is why we saved those at the 2880. We're revisiting those from way back before. And that dip below created a nice, really strong, we had a pivot right here, and so once it moved past it, you ended up with a little bit of a conversion buy set up right there with green over. Actually, that should be yellow. Let me convert that one back. I don't know why that got turned into magenta. It was supposed to be a yellow there. It didn't produce a whole lot. You ended up with the same separation. You could just go ahead and put magenta at this particular spot right here. The only difference here is you didn't quite get enough of a breakdown to really cause a dramatic kind of dip. And we hovered pretty flat, so usually you would look for that to break down well below, but as we stayed with that 2880, you ended up getting some buy conversions that took place right through here, and so you ended up with the cyan dip. That happens up later right there. Even from this dip in the crossover, was pretty decent above that 2880, so anytime you got to the 2880, that would have been a perfect opportunity to take that. And we were talking about this on the Skype chat because before here it was, the potential for a turnaround. And it's like, yeah, I expect that we'll get back above on an attempt to move back up towards the 23 or 38% on the 50K in that. But it's just a matter of waiting for this strong DOC buildup. And this particular case came right over here. And then this was another great teaching example that develops right in the middle of the move, because I said in the Skype chat that we would have that bounce, but that we would then still most likely finish towards the lows of the day. We ended up with that bounce, and then you end up with this first DOC spread, but you end up with it with steel just the opposite, below the red. That tends to hold on a little bit better. So even though it came in, and you're one of those where that's likely to have a little bit stronger support, but then it's this beautiful one right here where the steel comes back above red, crosses below, green is already below, orange spikes above, all of the elements right into one nice neat package and right at the ABM yellow, and then boom, that causes the cascade, and we end up creating more of these soft turnaround. This isn't enough to create a buy right here. At this particular point, when it crosses, there's potential right there at that particular spot, but you're still not getting anything from steel behavior at that point. And then we rejected right here, and then you can just again wait for that cross of the steel, and boom, that took down, but it produced a nice reset. came back above, and then we just got into a bunch of jagged, gentle climb. And so that's pretty tough to play this one because you're going to get all over the place. So I'm usually looking for, those plays where I'm going to be at the 50% point, either looking for signals that are short or continuation. In this spot, we ended up at green. Staying above quite a bit, even though the action was pretty sketchy all the way through, and it produced all the way up to the peak right there, even in this pre-market point. And we've just been back and forth within this. We're still below this previous peak, even though price is holding up quite nicely. So there's some support developing right here, and that's right along where that current 50% line is here so far at the 88 range. We're right about 91 right now, but we're caught between a pretty sizable gap between major algo levels. So we're going to either gravitate to one or the other. The DSC bed's going to have to make a stronger improvement. Now that the gold and Azure met, we're probably going to get more of a decision as we get ready to start the pre-market in a few hours. So that's the long and the short of it from a trade standpoint. It was a very exciting day. So all good action. As always, though, I'll keep putting up details on Skype chat. I was actually going through some of the marker indications of what you need when you're looking at the automation standpoint. We've talked about a few of those on the Skype chat as well, from the Opus 2 Power Mode to Opus 2 T, the added one that has the Momo in that. So all those little side things that you might fill in on some of the details were detailed a little bit more specifically. So we've done it before, but this was a nice opportunity to see it again if you hadn't seen it in a while. As always, though, I will be on the Skype chat, so look for me there. Any questions, I'm happy to answer them. As always, trade well. We'll talk to you later.